Your Grace, she's here.
The maid's voice trembled. The Duchess slowly closed the book she had been reading. She didn't even look up. Show her in. A few seconds later, her childhood best friend walked into the drawing room wearing the brightest smile on her face. She lifted her left hand on purpose. A magnificent engagement ring sparkled in the afternoon sunlight.
I came to tell you myself,
She said proudly.
His Grace has asked me to become his Duchess.
Everyone waited for the Duchess to cry, to scream, to slap the woman standing before her. Instead, the Duchess stood, walked toward her, held both of her hands, and smiled.
Congratulations.
The best friend blinked.
You're not angry?
The Duchess laughed softly.
Why would I be?
She leaned closer until only the two of them could hear. Then she whispered,
You think you're taking my place, but you're only taking my problems.
The best friend laughed. She thought the Duchess was only trying to hide her heartbreak. She had no idea those would become the most terrifying words she would ever remember. Before I tell you why the happiest Duchess in the kingdom smiled while another woman stole her husband, please support our channel by liking this video, subscribing, and telling us where you're watching from. Your support helps us continue bringing you unforgettable Duke and Duchess stories every week. Now, let's return to the day the entire kingdom believed she was the luckiest Duchess alive.
Every autumn, the royal palace hosted the Harvest Ball, the grandest celebration in the kingdom. Nobles travelled for days to attend it, hoping to catch the king's attention, strengthen alliances, or simply be seen among the highest ranks of society. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the magnificent ballroom, while an orchestra filled the air with elegant melodies. Dukes, duchesses, princes, earls, ladies, and foreign ambassadors gathered beneath one roof, dressed in their finest attire. Just as the master of ceremonies announced the arrival of Duke Ambrose Blackmore and Duchess Theodosia Blackmore, every conversation faded. The enormous doors opened. Duke Ambrose Blackmore entered first, tall and commanding, dressed in a perfectly tailored black military coat trimmed with silver. Beside him walked Theodosia, breathtaking in an ivory silk gown embroidered with delicate sapphire flowers that matched the necklace resting gracefully around her neck. Every eye followed them. Even Her Majesty the Queen smiled warmly as they approached.
Your Grace, may I have the honor of this dance? No, Your Grace, dance with me instead. Please, choose me, Your Grace.
Ladies, I am flattered. Perhaps later.
But Your Grace...
Throughout the evening, several unmarried noblewomen attempted to invite Duke Ambrose Blackmore onto the dance floor. One by one, he politely declined each invitation. I appreciate the honor, he said, with his usual charming smile.
Every dance belongs to my Duchess.
Oh, Ambrose.
A wave of admiration swept across the ballroom. The orchestra began another waltz as he extended his hand toward his wife. My Duchess, he said softly. Theodosia accepted his hand, and together they glided across the polished marble floor as though they had practiced the dance since childhood. Near the refreshment tables, two countesses watched with unmistakable envy. If my husband loved me half as much as Duke Ambrose Blackmore loves his wife, I would never complain again, her companion nodded. She was born in a poor cottage with nothing to her name. Now she wears jewels queens would envy. Fortune truly smiled upon her. Not far away stood Theodosia's childhood best friend. Lady Lettice Fairmont applauded politely with everyone else, but her smile concealed a growing bitterness. She watched Ambrose's affectionate gaze. She admired the priceless sapphire necklace. She noticed how every noble bowed respectfully whenever Theodosia passed. A single thought echoed inside her mind. Why does she deserve this life instead of me? Theodosia noticed her friend watching and walked over during the next pause in the music. I'm so happy you came, she said warmly, embracing Lettice. I wouldn't have missed it, Lettice replied, forcing another smile. You truly have everything. Theodosia hesitated for a moment before answering quietly, "Not everything." Lettice laughed, assuming she was simply being modest. She never imagined those two words carried far more pain than gratitude. Hours later, the celebration came to an end. Duke Ambrose Blackmore personally helped his wife into their carriage before climbing in beside her. As the cool evening breeze drifted through the open window, he carefully unfolded a thick wool blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. Outside, the stable boys exchanged admiring glances. "Have you ever seen a husband so devoted?" one whispered. The older coachman smiled. His Grace has never allowed Her Grace to step onto the ground without offering his hand first. Inside the carriage, Theodosia thanked her husband with a gentle smile. Only she knew it was forced. She silently counted every passing mile. The closer they came to Blackwood Estate, the heavier her heart became. The carriage rolled through the towering iron gates. Moments later, the great oak doors of the estate closed behind them with a deep echo that seemed to swallow every trace of warmth. The servants quietly disappeared into the corridors. Without warning, Ambrose reached toward his wife, his fingers wrapped around the sapphire necklace. With one violent pull, the clasp snapped. The necklace struck the marble floor, scattering precious stones across the drawing room. "You smiled too much at Prince Adrian," he said coldly. Theodosia stared in disbelief. "He only congratulated us on the harvest." Her sentence never ended. His hand struck her face so hard she lost her balance. Silence filled the room. Outside the doorway, the elderly housekeeper lowered her head before gently closing the door. She had heard that sound countless times. Inside, Ambrose ordered her wife to kneel. She obeyed without protest. He criticized everything about her, the way she greeted the royal family, the way she walked beside him, the way she smiled. Even the way she breathed during the evening embarrassed him according to his own impossible standards. Nothing she ever did pleased him. When he finally turned to leave, he paused beside the doorway. Without looking back, he said quietly, "Tomorrow morning, the kingdom will once again see a happy Duchess." Theodosia swallowed the tears burning behind her eyes. "Yes, Your Grace." Far beyond the estate, in a small farming village, Barnaby Fairmont and Dorothea Fairmont proudly welcomed neighbors into their modest home. Barnaby Fairmont smiled as he spoke about his daughter. "The day she married His Grace was the greatest blessing our family ever received." Thanks to the Duke's generosity, their son, Leopold Fairmont, attended the Royal Noble Academy, while their youngest daughter, Thomasina Fairmont, studied etiquette at one of the kingdom's finest finishing schools. Every season, wagons from Blackwood Estate arrived carrying grain, livestock, and enough money to keep the family comfortable. They believed their daughter's marriage had rescued them all. Back at Blackwood Estate, Theodosia slowly sat on the edge of her bed after everyone had fallen asleep. She placed a trembling hand over her stomach. For the first time that entire day, a genuine smile appeared on her face. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Maybe our child will change him." The weeks following the Harvest Ball brought an unfamiliar feeling into Theodosia's life. Hope. For the first time since becoming Duchess Theodosia Blackmore, she woke each morning with something to look forward to. Hidden beneath the elegant gowns and carefully practiced smiles was a tiny secret growing inside her. Every morning, before the servants arrived, she would rest her hands over her stomach and whisper gentle words to the child only she knew existed. She refused to tell Ambrose. Not yet. She wanted the moment to be special. Perhaps, she thought, becoming a father would awaken the kindness he only pretended to possess before the rest of the kingdom. Inside her private sitting room, she spent many afternoons sewing tiny baby clothes by the window. She carefully embroidered little flowers onto soft blankets and stitched a small pair of white slippers no larger than the palm of her hand. One afternoon, the estate's elderly seamstress quietly entered the room carrying folded fabric. She stopped when she noticed the tiny garment spread across the table. A gentle smile appeared on the old woman's face. "Your Grace," she whispered, Does His Grace know? Theodosia looked down at the blanket she was sewing and slowly shook her head. Not yet. The old woman stepped closer. Will you tell him soon? A genuine smile lit her face. I want to surprise him. For a brief moment, even the elderly seamstress allowed herself to believe happiness had finally found its way into Blackwood Estate. I pray this child brings peace into your home, she said softly. So do I, Theodosia replied. Unfortunately, peace never came. Several evenings later, Duke Ambrose Blackmer returned home after a long meeting with the King's Council. He arrived exhausted and already irritated by matters beyond the estate. Dinner had been prepared exactly as instructed. Everything was perfect, except the soup. One of the kitchen servants had suddenly fallen ill, delaying the meal by only a few minutes. The soup was no longer steaming. Ambrose lifted the silver spoon, tasted it once, and his expression darkened instantly. Cold. No one dared speak. Theodosia gently reached for the bowl. I'll have them warm it immediately. She never finished the sentence. Ambrose grabbed the heavy silver serving dish and hurled it across the dining room. It struck her violently before crashing onto the floor. Theodosia gasped as pain shot through her body. She collapsed beside the table. The servants rushed forward, but froze when Ambrose glared at them. No one moved. Then a maid screamed. Blood slowly spread across Theodosia's pale gown. The estate physician was summoned immediately. Doctors worked throughout the night, refusing to leave her bedside. Outside the room, servants gathered in silence, praying for both mother and child. Just after sunrise, the physician finally stepped out. His face said everything before he spoke. He lowered his head. I'm deeply sorry, Your Grace. We couldn't save the baby. Theodosia closed her eyes. No tears came. She simply stretched out a trembling hand toward the bedside table where the elderly seamstress had placed the tiny embroidered blanket she had spent weeks making. She held it tightly against her chest. That small blanket was the only thing she would ever have of her child. She fell asleep holding it. When she awoke later that afternoon, Ambrose entered her room. For a foolish second, she believed he had come to comfort her. Instead, he stood at the foot of the bed and looked at her with complete indifference. Perhaps, he said coldly, God knew you weren't worthy of giving me an heir. Without another word, he turned around and left. Theodosia stared at the closed door long after he had gone. Something inside her had begun to break. 3 days later, while still too weak to stand for long, she secretly left Blackwood Estate. She traveled to the small cottage where she had grown up. The moment Dorothea Fairmont opened the door, Theodosia rushed into her arms and burst into tears. My daughter, what happened? Barnaby Fairmont hurried over from the fireplace. For the first time in weeks, Theodosia felt safe. She believed she had finally reached the people who would protect her. Slowly, she rolled back the sleeves of her dress. Dark bruises covered both arms. Fresh cuts crossed her wrists. Purple marks stained her shoulders. Then, through trembling lips, she whispered, He killed my baby. The room became silent. Dorothea covered her mouth and began sobbing. Theodosia thought everything was finally going to change. Instead, Barnaby asked quietly, Did anyone see you come here? She could hardly breathe. I came because I need your help. Barnaby lowered his eyes. If you leave the Duke, your brother loses his place at the Royal Noble Academy. Your sister will be expelled from finishing school. The Duke will stop supporting this family. We will lose everything. Theodosia looked toward Dorothea. Surely her mother would defend her. Instead, Dorothea held both of her hands tightly and whispered through tears, My child, please endure just a little longer. Before she could answer, the front door opened. Leopold Fairmont walked inside. He had heard every word. She looked at him hopefully. He slowly walked toward her, then knelt before her, Please, just until I graduate, don't destroy my future." Those words hurt more than Ambrose's cruelty ever did. As evening fell, Theodosia quietly returned to Blackwood Estate. Ambrose was already waiting inside the drawing room. He looked at her swollen eyes and smiled with quiet satisfaction. "Your family reminded you where you belong, didn't they?" She lowered her head. For the first time in her life, she understood she had nowhere left to run. Winter gave way to spring, and life at Blackwood Estate settled into a painful routine. The bruises on Theodosia's body faded, only to be replaced by new ones. The servants had stopped reacting whenever they heard shouting from Ambrose's private chambers. They simply lowered their heads and continued working, pretending not to hear what everyone already knew. Theodosia no longer cried after every beating. She no longer pleaded for mercy. She had learned that silence often shortened his anger. Every morning she dressed in elegant gowns, covered the marks on her skin with powder, smiled politely before the household, and fulfilled every duty expected of a duchess. Every evening she returned to her room exhausted, not because of the work, but because pretending everything was normal had become the hardest part of her life. The woman who had once dreamed of changing her husband had quietly begun to accept that some people never changed. Then, when she least expected it, hope returned. Several months after losing her first child, the estate physician confirmed what she had hardly dared to believe. She was expecting another baby. Theodosia sat in stunned silence while the physician carefully folded away his instruments. "Congratulations, Your Grace," he said gently. "The child appears healthy." She thanked him, but before he reached the door, she quietly stopped him. "I'd beg you." He turned around. "Please don't tell His Grace." The physician hesitated. "My lady." She shook her head. "If he doesn't know, perhaps this child will live." The physician understood immediately. He gave a respectful nod before leaving without another question. Only one other person learned the secret: the elderly housekeeper who had served Blackwood Estate for more than 30 years. When Theodosia finally trusted her with the news, tears filled the old woman's eyes. "This time," she whispered, taking both of Theodosia's hands, "we will protect this little one." Theodosia smiled faintly. "I don't need anything else. I only want this child to survive." The old housekeeper promised that the secret would remain between them. For the first time in months, Theodosia allowed herself to dream again. Around that same period, another familiar face became a regular visitor to Blackwood Estate, Lady Lettice Fairmont. Her childhood friend began arriving almost every week. Sometimes she brought freshly picked flowers from her family's gardens. Other days she arrived carrying books, pastries from the capital, or rare teas she insisted Theodosia should try. She never arrived empty-handed. "I can't bear the thought of you feeling lonely in this enormous estate," Lettice often said. Theodosia welcomed every visit with genuine gratitude. After the disappointment she had suffered from her own family, having someone who willingly spent time with her felt like a blessing. The afternoons they spent together became the brightest moments of her week. They embroidered together, read novels beside the drawing-room fireplace, walked through the estate gardens discussing childhood memories. For a little while, Theodosia almost remembered what happiness felt like. She never noticed what everyone else quietly observed. Whenever Lettice complimented Ambrose, her voice softened. Whenever he entered the room, she straightened her posture and smiled a little wider. She laughed more freely at his jokes than anyone else. She praised his intelligence during political discussions. She admired his leadership whenever estate matters were mentioned. "His Grace has remarkable judgment," she would often say. "The tenants are fortunate to have such a wise duke." Theodosia simply smiled. She felt relieved hearing laughter inside Blackwood Estate again. She foolishly believed Lettice's cheerful company was easing the tension between her and her husband. She never imagined another reason for Ambrose's improving mood. Then everything collapsed. One afternoon, while organizing clothing for the coming season, Ambrose entered her dressing room unexpectedly. His eyes immediately fell upon several tiny garments carefully hidden inside an open chest, a knitted blanket, a pair of miniature socks, a delicate baby gown. He slowly lifted one of them. His face darkened. "What is this?" Theodosia froze. She had forgotten to lock the chest. She stepped forward nervously. "I wanted to tell you," he interrupted. "You plan to hide this from me." His voice rose with every word. "You plan to keep my own child a secret." She tried to explain. "I was afraid." Ambrose interpreted those words as an accusation rather than a confession. Without warning, he shoved her violently away from him. She stumbled backward. Her foot caught the edge of the staircase outside the dressing room. She lost her balance. Theodosia tumbled down the long marble staircase, striking each step before collapsing motionless at the bottom. The elderly housekeeper rushed into the hallway. "Someone fetch the physician!" she screamed. Servants came running from every direction. Hours later, the physician emerged from the bedroom with sorrow written across his face. He looked directly at Theodosia. "I'm deeply sorry. The child is gone. Again." The room became unbearably quiet. The physician gathered enough courage to face Ambrose. "Your Grace," he said firmly, "Her Grace's body has endured severe trauma. If this violence continues, I'm afraid she may never carry another child." Ambrose's expression never changed. "Then she has no purpose as my Duchess." Theodosia heard every word through the slightly open bedroom door. She closed her eyes. This time, she did not cry. That evening, unable to sleep, she stood beside the bedroom window overlooking the entrance to Blackwood Estate. A carriage rolled through the gates. Lady Lettice Fairmont stepped out, carrying a bouquet of fresh white roses. To Theodosia's surprise, Ambrose personally walked outside to greet her. He accepted the flowers with a warm smile, a smile so gentle, so effortless, it was a smile Theodosia could no longer remember ever receiving herself. As she watched them disappear into the gardens together, she rested one hand against the cold window pane and whispered quietly, "So, that's where your kindness went." Sleep abandoned Theodosia that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the tiny white blanket she had embroidered for the child she would never hold. The silence inside Blackwood Estate felt heavier than ever, and the emptiness in her heart refused to let her rest. Just after midnight, she noticed movement outside her bedroom window. A lantern flickered in the gardens. Curious, she quietly wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and slipped out of her room without waking the servants. The estate gardens stretched peacefully beneath the moonlight. Marble statues cast long shadows across the walking paths, while the scent of blooming roses drifted through the cool night air. She followed the faint sound of laughter. It wasn't difficult to recognize. Ambrose rarely laughed. When he did, it was never inside their home. She slowed her steps as she approached the ancient oak tree that stood near the fountain. Then she stopped. Ambrose was standing beneath its branches. Facing him was Lady Lettice Fairmont, her childhood friend. Ambrose gently held both of Lettice's hands. The same hands that had struck his wife countless times now touched another woman with tenderness. Theodosia remained hidden behind the trunk of another tree. Neither of them noticed her. "I almost pity her," Lettice said quietly. Ambrose smirked. "You pity my wife? She isn't the woman you deserve anymore." Ambrose looked toward the estate. "She stopped being that woman long ago." Lettice's eyes lowered before asking the question she had clearly rehearsed many times. "If you were free, would you choose me?" Ambrose didn't hesitate. "Soon, I'll have no reason to keep her." Lettice's face lit with excitement. "Then, I'll finally become Duchess." Theodosia waited for the pain. She expected her heart to shatter. She expected tears. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: relief. She leaned against the tree and quietly closed her eyes. A faint smile appeared on her face. "Thank you," she whispered. Not to them, not to fate, but to the unexpected opportunity standing before her. For years, she had searched for a way to escape Blackwood Estate. She had believed death might be the only door left open. Now, another door had appeared. Someone else wanted her place. Someone else was willing to stand exactly where she had stood. At that moment, she made a decision. She would never fight for Ambrose again. If Lettice wanted the title, she could have it. The following morning, Theodosia knelt beside her bed and carefully lifted a loose floorboard hidden beneath the carpet. Inside rested a small velvet pouch. It contained only a handful of gold sovereigns, not enough to begin a new life, but enough to begin preparing for one. Every week afterwards, she quietly added another coin. She sold pieces of jewelry Ambrose had long forgotten giving her, nothing large enough to attract attention, only bracelets, brooches, and trinkets that could disappear unnoticed. She asked the old estate seamstress to teach her advanced embroidery techniques used by royal dressmakers. The old woman looked surprised. "Your Grace," she said, "why would a duchess need to earn a living with her hands?" Theodosia smiled gently. "Because titles don't always last forever." The seamstress asked no further questions. She simply began teaching. In the afternoons, Theodosia spent time with the estate steward under the excuse of reviewing household accounts. Instead, she learned bookkeeping, how to calculate expenses, how to negotiate prices, how successful merchants managed their businesses. Whenever suppliers arrived at the estate, she paid close attention to their conversations. She studied fabrics, trade routes, luxury goods. She listened far more than she spoke. Every lesson carried the same purpose. If freedom finally came, she intended to survive it. A few days later, Theodosia invited Lettice for afternoon tea. The table was beautifully arranged beneath the glass conservatory overlooking the gardens. Fresh pastries sat untouched between them. For a while they spoke about ordinary things, the weather, the coming harvest, the latest royal banquet. Then Theodosia sighed deeply. "I've failed His Grace." Lettice immediately reached across the table. "Don't say that." Theodosia looked down into her teacup. "I do love him, but love isn't always enough." Lettice remained silent. Theodosia continued quietly. "He deserves someone who understands his ambitions, someone who can stand proudly beside a powerful duke." She looked directly at her friend. "I don't think that woman is me anymore." For a brief second, a spark appeared in Lettice's eyes. She tried to hide it, but Theodosia noticed. Then she added one final sentence. "He deserves someone stronger than I am." Lettice quickly lowered her gaze to hide the smile forming on her lips. She spoke words of comfort, but her heart had already accepted the invitation Theodosia never truly offered. As Lettice's carriage disappeared through the estate gates that evening, Theodosia knew exactly what would happen next. She had not pushed her friend toward Ambrose. She had simply removed every reason to hesitate. That night, after the household had fallen asleep, she opened the leather diary she had kept since her wedding day. Many earlier pages were stained with tears. Others contained prayers asking God to save her marriage. She turned to a blank page, dipped her pen into ink, and then wrote only one sentence. "Today, I stopped praying for my marriage to survive and started preparing for my freedom." Across the drawing room, Ambrose looked up from his newspaper and watched his wife in silence. He saw only a quiet, defeated woman who no longer argued. He smiled to himself, believing he had finally broken her spirit. He never imagined that the greatest threat to his control was no longer rebellion. It was a woman who had already decided to let him believe every victory was his own.
Theodosia's quiet transformation continued for months. To everyone outside Blackwood Estate, she remained the graceful and devoted wife of one of the kingdom's most respected dukes. Inside the estate, however, she became a woman Ambrose could no longer understand. She never argued, she never raised her voice, she never openly disobeyed him. Instead, she became quietly disappointing. If Ambrose requested his favorite venison for supper, it arrived slightly overcooked, never burnt, never inedible, just enough to irritate him. If he expected her to receive visiting nobles at precisely 3 o'clock, she arrived a few minutes late with a sincere apology. Whenever he criticized her, she no longer cried or begged for forgiveness. She simply lowered her head and answered calmly, "I'm sorry, Your Grace. I'll do better tomorrow." That answer frustrated him more than any argument ever had. There was nothing he could accuse her of, nothing serious enough for others to notice, yet somehow she exhausted his patience day after day. Ironically, outside their home, she became an even more devoted wife. At royal banquets, she proudly held his arm. Whenever someone praised Ambrose, she smiled and added, "My husband works harder for this kingdom than anyone realizes." If someone complimented her gown, she always replied, "His Grace has always taken wonderful care of me." Soon, the entire kingdom began praising Ambrose even more than before. People admired his marriage. Young noblemen tried to imitate him. Young ladies dreamed of marrying a husband like Duke Ambrose Blackmore. The admiration only made him more miserable. He was trapped inside an image he no longer wished to maintain. Meanwhile, Lettuce grew bolder. She no longer hid the confidence in her voice whenever she spoke to Ambrose. During one afternoon stroll through the gardens, she quietly said, "A man of your position deserves a duchess worthy of your name." Ambrose remained silent. Encouraged by his silence, she continued, "You carry this estate alone. You deserve a wife who inspires you instead of disappointing you." The seed Theodosia had planted months earlier was finally taking root. Every carefully chosen sentence, every calculated mistake, every polite apology, everything had led to this moment. The breaking point came during Ambrose's annual estate banquet. Several influential nobles, neighboring dukes, merchants, and members of the King's
Welcome, Lord
Council
Hastings.
had
We are
gathered
delighted you
inside
could
the
attend.
great
The
dining
honor is
hall.
mine, Duchess. A splendid
Theodosia
evening.
personally
Thank you. Please
welcomed
enjoy
every
the
guest
festivities.
with perfect
A fine
courtesy.
gathering, my dear.
Dinner had barely begun when one servant accidentally poured wine into the wrong crystal glass. It was a tiny mistake, one Theodosia immediately corrected, but Ambrose had already decided he wanted an audience. He slowly rose from his chair. The room fell silent. His expression hardened. "I have tolerated incompetence for too long." Every guest looked toward Theodosia. Ambrose pointed directly at her. "This household has become an embarrassment." His words echoed across the hall. "You cannot manage servants. You cannot manage this estate." His voice became even colder. "And after all these years, you still cannot give me the heir this family deserves." Theodosia lowered her eyes. Several ladies exchanged uncomfortable glances. No one expected a husband to shame his wife so publicly. Ambrose took one final step forward. "From this day forward, you are no longer my wife." Silence. The orchestra stopped playing. Even the servants stood frozen. Theodosia slowly fell to her knees. Tears filled her eyes. She reached toward him with trembling hands. "Please, don't cast me aside. I'll do better. I'll become the wife you deserve." Several noblewomen began wiping away tears. An elderly earl quietly muttered, "This is too cruel." Ambrose felt triumphant. He believed every word she spoke. He believed he had completely broken her spirit. Only one person knew the truth, Theodosia herself. Behind those tears, her heart was lighter than it had been in years. The prison door had finally opened. The guests watched as servants packed a small trunk containing her personal belongings. She accepted it without protest. As she walked toward the front entrance of Blackwood Estate, Lettuce stepped into her path. She wore an elegant emerald gown Theodosia had never seen before. A diamond necklace sparkled around her neck. She smiled with barely concealed satisfaction. "I finally have everything." For a brief moment, Theodosia looked into the eyes of the woman she had once trusted more than a sister. She almost warned her. She almost told her the truth. Instead, she simply smiled. "Take good care of him." Lettuce misunderstood the sadness in her voice. She believed it was defeat.
She proudly walked past the former Duchess toward the grand entrance of the estate. Theodosia never looked back. By sunset, she reached her parents' cottage. She knocked gently. Dorothea Fairmont opened the door. The moment she saw the travel trunk, her face turned pale. What happened? Before Theodosia could answer, Barnaby Fairmont appeared behind her. "You've been sent away?" She nodded silently, his expression immediately filled with anger. "Do you know what you've done? The Duke will never forgive this family." Dorothea began crying, but instead of embracing her daughter, she whispered desperately, "Go back, fall at his feet, beg him to take you back." Leopold Fairmont stepped forward. "You promised you wouldn't ruin everything." Even Thomasina Fairmont, who had always adored her, lowered her eyes and remained silent. Theodosia looked at each of them. Not one person asked if she had eaten, not one person asked where she would sleep, not one person asked whether she was safe. That night, she rested on a wooden bench outside the cottage. Before sunrise, she quietly picked up her small trunk. Without knocking on the door, without saying goodbye, she walked away from the only family she had ever known. This time, she never intended to return.
Theodosia walked for hours before reaching the nearest town. She carried only one small trunk, a few changes of clothing, the gold coins she had secretly saved over the past several months, and the skills she had prayed she would never need. For the first time in years, no one knew where she was. No one could order her. No one could strike her. She was finally free. Yet freedom came with a price. The tiny room she rented above a baker's shop was barely large enough for a narrow bed, a wooden chair, and a small table beneath a single window. When it rained, water slipped through the roof, forcing her to place buckets across the floor before going to sleep. She had never lived in such humble conditions, yet every night she slept more peacefully than she ever had inside Blackwood Estate. Her savings disappeared quickly. She counted every coin before buying food. Most days she survived on bread, vegetable soup, and whatever fruit was cheapest at the market. There were evenings when hunger kept her awake. Still, she never once regretted leaving. Every morning she reminded herself, a poor woman with peace is richer than a duchess living in fear. She devoted every spare hour to embroidery. The elderly seamstress at Blackwood Estate had taught her techniques reserved for royal dressmakers, and now she practiced them until her hands could move without hesitation. She embroidered late into the night beneath the dim light of a single oil lamp. Her fingers became swollen. Tiny needles pierced her skin countless times. Sometimes drops of blood stained the fabric. She would quietly wash the cloth, wrap another bandage around her finger, and continue working. Giving up was no longer an option. Her first finished handkerchief sold for only a few silver coins. It wasn't much, but it proved someone was willing to pay for her work. The following week she completed another, then a pair of embroidered gloves, then a shawl decorated with delicate golden thread. Slowly, customers returned. One merchant's wife admired her craftsmanship and ordered a custom table runner. A baroness requested embroidered pillow covers. Soon, word spread among the noble ladies of the capital. Everyone wanted to know the identity of the mysterious seamstress whose work rivaled that of the finest royal artisans. Theodosia never used her title. She introduced herself only by her given name. Her reputation grew because of her talent, not because of her past. Within a year, she rented a larger workshop and hired 2 young widows who desperately needed work. Months later, she employed 6 women. Before long, elegant carriages lined the street outside her shop. The same aristocrats who had once admired her as a duchess now admired her as a successful businesswoman. None of them recognized her at first. She had changed, not only in appearance, but in confidence. Meanwhile, preparations for another wedding filled Blackwood Estate. Lady Lettice Fairmont stood before a mirror while servants carefully fastened a magnificent diamond necklace around her neck. She admired herself endlessly. "I always knew this life was meant for me," she said proudly. The wedding became the biggest event of the season. The kingdom celebrated Ambrose's new marriage. Guests praised the bride's beauty. Many whispered that she looked even happier than Theodosia ever had. Young ladies envied her. Older nobles congratulated Ambrose on beginning a new chapter.
exactly as they had once envied the first Duchess. Lettuce believed she had finally won. For the first week after the wedding, life felt exactly as she had imagined. Ambrose smiled often. He surprised her with expensive jewels. They rode together through the estate every afternoon. He even asked her opinion during estate meetings. She proudly believed she had succeeded where her former friend had failed. During the second week, subtle changes appeared. Ambrose became quieter. His patience grew shorter. He criticized little things that had never mattered before. The flowers she chose for the dining table, the arrangement of the drawing room, the timing of afternoon tea. Whenever she laughed too loudly, he frowned. Whenever she spoke during conversations with guests, he corrected her. She convinced herself he was merely under pressure. By the third week, the illusion ended. One evening, she accidentally interrupted him while he was reading estate reports. "I thought you might like some tea," she said gently. Ambrose slowly looked up. "I didn't ask for tea." "I'm sorry, I only wanted—" The slap came without warning. She stumbled sideways, one hand pressed against her burning cheek. She stood perfectly still, unable to move, unable to speak. The room around her suddenly felt painfully familiar. She was standing in the exact place where Theodosia had once stood, countless times. Fragments of old memories rushed back into her mind. The strange sadness in Theodosia's eyes, the forced smiles, the hesitation when anyone praised Ambrose, the quiet words spoken on the day Theodosia left. "Take good care of him." For the first time, Lettuce understood what those words truly meant. Ashamed to admit the truth, she hid everything. When ladies at court asked about the bruise near her jaw, she smiled. "I bumped into a door." A week later, another mark appeared. "I slipped while walking down the stairs." Soon, she stopped wearing gowns with open necklines. High collars became part of every outfit. Long sleeves covered the bruises on her arms. Powder concealed the discoloration beneath her eyes. Without realizing it, she had become exactly what Theodosia used to be, a woman the kingdom envied, and no one truly knew.
Nearly a year had passed since Lettuce Fairmont became Duchess Lettuce Blackmore. To the outside world, she was living the dream every noble woman desired. She attended royal banquets dressed in magnificent gowns. She rode beside Ambrose during public ceremonies. People bowed as she passed through the capital. Women admired her jewels. Young ladies whispered that she had become the most fortunate duchess in the kingdom. No one knew the truth. Every morning she spent nearly an hour covering bruises before facing the world. Every evening she wondered what small mistake would provoke Ambrose next. Sometimes it was because dinner arrived a few minutes late. Sometimes because she greeted the wrong guest first. Other times there was no reason at all. She finally understood something that haunted her every waking moment. Ambrose had never needed a reason. He simply needed someone weaker than himself. One rainy afternoon, after another violent argument, Lettuce stood before the mirror inside her dressing room. A swollen bruise stretched beneath her left eye. Her lower lip was split. As she stared at her own reflection, another face appeared in her memory, Theodosia. She remembered the forced smiles, the quiet sadness, the strange pity in Theodosia's eyes on the day she left Blackwood Estate. Then those unforgettable words echoed inside her mind once again. "Take good care of him." For the first time, she understood they had never been spoken with jealousy. They had been spoken with compassion. That realization broke her completely. The following morning, disguised beneath a plain cloak and traveling without the estate carriage, Lettuce secretly left Blackwood Estate. After asking several merchants for directions, she finally arrived at a modest but elegant embroidery shop in the capital. Its windows displayed exquisite gowns and handcrafted lace admired throughout the kingdom. She hesitated before entering. A young assistant welcomed her politely. "May I help you, my lady?" "I'm here to see the owner." Moments later, Theodosia appeared. She looked different, healthier, confident, peaceful. For several long seconds, neither woman spoke. Lettuce expected anger. She expected accusations. Instead, Theodosia smiled gently.
You've come a long way." She led Lettuce into a private sitting room. Without asking questions, she poured tea into 2 porcelain cups. They sat together in silence. The quiet felt heavier than any conversation. Finally, Lettuce began crying. "I thought I had won." Her voice shook uncontrollably. "I thought you were jealous." She lowered her head. "Why didn't you stop me?" Theodosia looked at her with quiet understanding. Then she asked one simple question.
Would you have believed me? No, I wouldn't have.
Silence filled the room. Lettuce searched her own heart for the answer. She remembered how desperately she had wanted the title, the estate, Ambrose. She remembered convincing herself that her friend simply wasn't good enough for such a powerful man. Slowly, she shook her head. No. That single word carried more regret than 1,000 apologies. Theodosia reached across the table and gently held her hand. "I don't hate you. I stopped hating you the day I walked away from that estate." Fresh tears rolled down Lettuce's face. "I'm sorry. I stole your life." Theodosia gave a faint smile. "No, you stole the prison I no longer wanted." Those words remained in Lettuce's mind long after she returned to Blackwood Estate. That night she made a decision. She would leave. No title, no jewels, no fortune were worth living in fear. She locked herself inside her room and carefully wrote a letter to Barnaby Fairmont. She begged him to come for her. She confessed everything she had hidden since her wedding, the beatings, the lies, the bruises. She ended the letter with one heartbreaking sentence. "Father, if you don't come now, I don't think I'll survive much longer." Before dawn, she secretly handed the sealed letter to a young stable boy. "Please make sure this reaches my father." The frightened servant nodded. Unfortunately, he never reached the estate gates. Ambrose intercepted him in the courtyard. Minutes later, Ambrose entered Lettuce's room holding the opened letter in his hand. His face was filled with terrifying rage. "So, you've been begging for rescue." Lettuce's heart stopped. She slowly stepped backward. Ambrose ripped the letter into tiny pieces and threw them across the room. "You ungrateful woman! I gave you everything, and now you wish to disgrace my name?" She turned toward the door. He blocked her path. She tried to run past him. He grabbed her arm. She struggled desperately. "Please, let me leave." His answer was a violent shove. Lettuce stumbled backward. Her heels slipped on the polished marble floor. She lost her balance. Then she fell. Her body rolled helplessly down the long staircase before crashing onto the marble below. The sound echoed through Blackwood Estate. Servants rushed into the entrance hall. The elderly housekeeper screamed for the physician. Doctors fought for hours to save her life. By evening, they succeeded, but the victory came with a terrible cost. The physician quietly informed the household, "Her Grace will live, but the injury to her neck cannot be repaired." Unable to move anything below her shoulders, Lettuce lay silently in bed. She understood the truth before anyone dared speak it. She wasn't going to recover. The following morning, she made only one request. She didn't ask for Ambrose. She refused to see Barnaby Fairmont. She requested neither priests nor noble visitors. Looking at the elderly housekeeper, she whispered with the little strength she had left, "Please, bring me my friend."
Theodosia arrived at Blackwood Estate just before sunset. It was the first time she had stepped through those gates since the day she had been cast out. Everything looked the same. The grand fountain still stood in the center of the courtyard. The flower gardens were still perfectly trimmed. The marble walls still reflected the golden evening light. Yet something had changed. The estate no longer felt powerful. It felt haunted. The elderly housekeeper met her at the entrance. Without saying a word, the old woman embraced her tightly. Tears streamed down her wrinkled cheeks. "I prayed you would never have to return here," she whispered. Theodosia gently squeezed her hand. "I'm not here for him. I'm here for her." The housekeeper silently led her upstairs. The room was painfully quiet.
curtains had been drawn to soften the afternoon sunlight. The scent of medicine filled the air. Lettuce lay motionless on the bed. The confident young woman who had once dreamed of becoming Duchess had disappeared. Her face had become pale. Her breathing was shallow. Only her eyes moved. When she saw her former friend enter the room, fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. The servants quietly left, closing the door behind them. For several moments, neither woman spoke. Theodosia slowly walked to the bedside and gently took Lettuce's hand. It felt cold, fragile, barely alive. Lettuce struggled to speak. I stole... Her voice broke. I stole your husband. Theodosia gently shook her head. No. A faint smile appeared on her face. You took my prison. Lettuce closed her eyes. More tears escaped. I thought I had won. You did, Theodosia answered softly. You won everything I had prayed to lose. Silence filled the room again. After a long moment, Lettuce whispered the question that had haunted her since visiting the embroidery shop. Can you forgive me? Theodosia gently brushed a strand of hair away from Lettuce's forehead. I forgave you the day I walked away from this estate. You were never my greatest enemy. We were both victims of the same man. Lettuce wept quietly. Thank you. Those were the last clear words she ever spoke. 2 days later, she passed away peacefully before sunrise. Barnaby Fairmont arrived at Blackwood Estate only hours after her death. He had originally traveled there because disturbing rumors about Lettuce's marriage had reached his estate. Instead, he found his only child dead. Grief quickly turned into determination. He gave investigators a detailed account of everything he had witnessed on the day of her fall. The frightened stable boy admitted Ambrose had intercepted the letter begging for help. The elderly housekeeper finally revealed years of abuse she had silently endured while serving the family. One by one, the servants found the courage to speak. The physician confirmed both miscarriages had resulted from violent assaults. Kitchen staff described countless nights of shouting. Footmen testified about broken furniture and terrified maids. The carefully crafted image of the perfect Duke collapsed piece by piece. The investigation lasted several weeks. When it ended, the verdict shocked the kingdom. Ambrose was arrested and charged for years of brutal violence that ultimately led to the death of his second wife. His noble title was stripped by royal decree. Blackwood Estate was seized by the crown. His wealth was divided according to the law. The man once praised as the kingdom's model noble became a warning whispered to young ladies throughout the realm. Parents no longer pointed toward his portrait with admiration. They pointed toward it with sorrow. Years passed. Theodosia never returned to noble life. She didn't need another title. She had built something far greater. Her embroidery house had become the most respected fashion establishment in the kingdom. Queens, princesses, duchesses, foreign ambassadors, all commissioned gowns bearing her signature craftsmanship. More importantly, she employed dozens of women who had once struggled as she had. Many were widows, some had escaped abusive marriages, others had nowhere else to go. She gave them honest work, fair wages, and dignity. One quiet afternoon, her assistant entered the workshop. "My lady, there are visitors asking to see you." She stepped outside. Standing near the entrance were Barnaby Fairmont, Dorothea Fairmont, Leopold Fairmont, and Thomasina Fairmont. Time had aged them all. Barnaby Fairmont, once proud and stubborn, slowly dropped to his knees. Dorothea Fairmont covered her face as she cried. Leopold lowered his head. "We failed you." The words were barely audible. "We chose comfort over our own daughter. We have regretted it every day." Theodosia listened without interrupting. When they finished, she spoke calmly. "I forgave all of you long ago." Relief spread across their faces. Dorothea Fairmont reached toward her hopefully. Then Theodosia continued.
Forgive you.
"But forgiveness does not restore trust. I wish you peace. I wish you health. And if hardship ever finds you again, I will never allow you to go hungry." She paused before finishing. "But I cannot return to the life we once had. My heart healed because I walked away. I will not open wounds that finally closed." Her family understood. There would be no angry farewell, no dramatic rejection, only acceptance. Theodosia watched them leave before quietly returning to her workshop. The women inside greeted her with warm smiles. The sound of laughter filled the room. For the first time in many years, she realized she no longer measured her worth by the title she had lost. She measured it by the life she had rebuilt. She had once believed surviving was enough. Now she understood something far greater. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not destroying the people who hurt you. It is refusing to let them decide who you become. And that was the one victory no one could ever take away from her.